Buckle up for a wild ride into the dark, twisted world of Henry VIII, England's most infamous king, whose life makes your wildest nightmares look tame. Forget the polished portraits of a regal monarch. This is the grotesque, gut-churning reality of a man whose body and mind crumbled under the weight of his own monstrous appetites. Picture a king so massive he needed machines to haul his rotting frame, his festering wounds so vile that servants fled in disgust. From his deranged eating habits to a paranoia that turned his court into a house of horrors, this is the Henry VIII you won't find in any textbook. His reign was a masterclass in chaos, and his decaying body was the ultimate traitor. Let's dive into the first shocking truth. Henry's physical ruin was a spectacle of horror. By his final years, he wasn't just a king, he was a walking catastrophe, a bloated, oozing shell of a man who terrified even his closest attendants. His waist ballooned to a staggering 54 inches, wider than most men are tall, and his weight tipped the scales at nearly 400 pounds, dwarfing the average man's 140-pound frame. But it wasn't just his size. His legs, riddled with gaping, pus-filled ulcers, reeked so horrifically that courtiers clutched scented cloths to their faces to stomach his presence. The stench was so potent it could choke you from rooms away. Servants drew lots to avoid the gruesome task of dressing him, treating it like a death sentence. This was no mere kingly excess. This was a body in revolt, a grotesque symbol of a reign spiraling into madness. Hold your breath, because Henry VIII's descent into horror only gets darker. His body wasn't just a bloated wreck, it was a ticking time bomb, ravaged by a catastrophic injury that turned a once charming king into a raging beast. Picture this. In 1536, a jousting accident smashed Henry's skull, leaving him unconscious for a grueling 2 hours. Practically a death knell in medieval times. This wasn't just a concussion, it rewired his brain. Historians now suspect this trauma sparked wild mood swings, paranoia, and a vicious temper that defined his later years. The Golden Prince who once dazzled Europe morphed into a tyrant who'd execute you for a sideways glance. But there's more. Modern experts whisper of Cushing syndrome, a condition that could explain his ballooning weight, erratic rages, and those oozing leg sores that refused to heal. His own doctors, trembling at the thought of his wrath, wouldn't dare hint at his frailty. Calling the king sick was treason. By his final days, Henry's body betrayed him so completely he couldn't even control his bowels, forcing servants to lug special chairs everywhere to catch his accidents. This was the man who claimed divine rule, reduced to a pitiful, rotting giant, his every move a grotesque spectacle of decay. Brace yourself for a plunge into the chilling cruelty of Henry VIII's court, where his 6 wives faced horrors that make execution seem merciful. Everyone knows he beheaded 2, but the raw terror those women endured was a twisted game of psychological torment. Take Anne Boleyn. Henry didn't just order her death, he spun a diabolical web, framing her with fake charges of adultery. He forced her own musician to confess under torture to sleeping with her, then made her watch as 5 men, including her own brother, were slaughtered for the same fabricated crime. Imagine her standing there, heart pounding, knowing her neck was next. Then there's Catherine Howard, barely a teenager when she wed the decaying king. When Henry learned of her past lovers, he didn't stop at her execution. He rewrote the law, declaring it treason for any bride to hide her sexual history from him. Petty doesn't even begin to cover it. He showered his wives with jewels one moment, then plunged them into dread with threats or icy silence the next. These women were trapped. Escape meant death, defiance meant doom for their families. Henry's love was a venomous trap, and his court was a stage for his sadistic whims. Dive deeper into the nightmare of Henry VIII's reign. where his treatment of his wives spun a web of cruelty that would haunt even the darkest minds. Catherine of Aragon, his first queen, wasn't just discarded. She was caged in misery, banished to house arrest, barred from seeing her daughter Mary, while Henry spread vile rumors of her madness. Some whisper she was poisoned, dying alone, her desperate letters to him ignored. Then there's Anne of Cleves, so terrified of his wrath that she signed away her marriage, pretending it never happened just to escape the axe. Jane Seymour, the lucky one, died in agony from childbirth complications, and Henry barely mourned. 9 days after her funeral, he was already hunting his next bride. The man treated his wives like pawns, disposable in his ruthless quest for power and heirs. But here's the kicker: these women had no way out. Running meant certain death, and resistance could doom their entire families. Henry's court was a gilded prison, where love was a death sentence and every gesture hid a blade. His wives weren't just victims, they were survivors of a tyrant's twisted game. Prepare to gag at the sheer excess of Henry VIII's gluttony, a feast of madness that could starve a kingdom. This wasn't just royal dining, it was a deranged spectacle of consumption. Henry devoured around 5,000 calories daily, more than double what a healthy man needs, despite barely being able to waddle in his later years. His table groaned under roasted pigs, whole chickens, heaps of fish, and oceans of wine, with over 800 dishes churned out daily by a frantic kitchen staff of 200. But the real insanity? Henry's bizarre food obsessions. He gorged on swans, believing they'd make him graceful, and devoured deer to sharpen his hunting prowess. Never mind he could hardly walk. Oysters, he thought, would boost his bedroom performance. Every bite was a ritual. Multiple tasters sampled his food, waiting 30 minutes to ensure no poison lingered, while he dined like a god before hundreds of courtiers in hours-long displays. Here's the twist: he banned peasant foods like turnips and barley, deeming them unfit for his divine palate, even as his body rotted from his meat and sugar orgies. Henry's feasts weren't just meals, they were a grotesque theater of a king convinced his royal blood defied nature's consequences. Step into the suffocating shadows of Henry VIII's Paranoia, where every whisper was a threat and trust was a death wish. This wasn't just a king with jitters. Henry turned his kingdom into a chilling surveillance state that would make tyrants envious. By his final years, his mind was a maze of fear, convinced every soul plotted his downfall. Picture this: he slept with loaded crossbows by his bedside, daggers tucked under his pillow, and armed guards watching his every snore. His palaces became fortresses of dread, laced with secret passages for frantic escapes and hidden peepholes to spy on his own courtiers. But the true madness? Henry built a web of spies so twisted it boggled the mind. Informants stalked his informants, creating a nightmare where no one knew who to trust. A wrong word could land you in the tower, and courtiers lived in constant terror, their lives dangling by the thread of the king's delusions. Even his meals were a military operation, with sealed kitchens, guarded spices, and tasters risking death to protect him from imagined poisons. Henry's paranoia didn't just rule him, it poisoned his entire court, turning it into a sinister game of betrayal and fear. Plunge deeper into the abyss of Henry VIII's paranoia, where his fractured mind turned his court into a twisted labyrinth of suspicion. This king didn't just fear betrayal, he saw treachery in every shadow, even in his own blood. His daughters, Princess Mary and Elizabeth, weren't spared. He had spies trailing them, convinced these children were scheming to topple him. Imagine the chill of being a royal child under your father's distrustful gaze, treated like an enemy in your own home. Henry's madness went further. He ordered executions on mere whims, slaying people for crimes they hadn't even committed, sometimes because a dream or a stray rumor hinted at disloyalty. The Tower of London brimmed with prisoners whose only sin was crossing paths with the king's foul mood. His paranoia was a plague, infecting his entire court. Nobles turned on each other, servants snitched for scraps of favor, and every whisper carried the weight of a death sentence. Food became a battlefield of fear. Every grain of salt, every drop of water was tested by layers of tasters, as if poison lurked in every bite. Henry's reign wasn't just rule by fear. It was a suffocating nightmare where loyalty was a myth and survival was a gamble. Brace for the gruesome finale of Henry VIII's reign, where even death couldn't tame his chaos. In his final weeks, the king's body was a decaying monstrosity, so massive he couldn't walk. Servants hauled him around in a custom chair rigged with pulleys, a grotesque parade of a once mighty ruler. His leg ulcers, oozing pus and rotting flesh, were so vile that chunks of him fell to the palace floor, forcing attendants to trail behind, mopping up the king's decomposing remains. The stench was unbearable. His own doctors, hardened by medieval horrors, fled to retch. When death finally claimed him in 1547, no one dared approach to confirm it, so grotesque was his swollen, shiny corpse. But here's the ghastly twist. His body kept wreaking havoc. His coffin, reinforced with lead to contain the bloated remains, was a ticking bomb. Stuffed with gases from his rotting flesh, it became a macabre relic of a king who ruled by divine right, but died as a putrid ruin. Henry's end wasn't just a death, it was a revolting spectacle that proved even mortality couldn't contain his monstrous legacy. Hold your stomach, because Henry VIII's death was a horror show that refused to end. His corpse, a bloated, gas-filled nightmare, turned his funeral into a grotesque catastrophe. They wrapped his remains in lead and sealed them in layered wooden boxes, thinking it would contain the rot. They were dead wrong. During the grim procession from London to Windsor Castle, the unthinkable happened. His coffin burst open. The pressure from his decomposing body ripped through the lead, spewing rancid royal remains across the hearse. The stench was so vile, the entire funeral halted as servants scrambled with buckets to clean the mess. But here's the detail that'll sear into your nightmares. Dogs reportedly lapped up the leaked remains of England's divine king, turning a country road into a scene from a twisted horror tale. Even burial was chaos. His massive coffin needed an extra-wide grave, but the ground kept collapsing under the weight of lead and decay. It took multiple tries to bury the man who once ruled an empire. Henry's death wasn't just an end. It was a final revolting act of a reign that thrived on chaos. Prepare for the chilling curtain call of Henry VIII's reign, where even his grave couldn't contain the chaos he unleashed. For years after his burial, eerie tales swirled of strange noises and foul odors seeping from his tomb. Some swore it was his vengeful ghost, but historians point to the grim truth. His corpse, still bloated with gases, kept decomposing, a restless monument to his monstrous life. The horror didn't end there. Whispers tell of servants who handled his putrid remains, dropping dead within weeks, possibly struck down by infections from the king's rotting flesh. This was no mere death, it was a final grotesque rebellion of a body that mirrored the tyranny of his soul. Henry VIII, the king who claimed divine power, ended as a cautionary tale, a gluttonous, paranoid tyrant whose own decay outdid his cruelty. His legacy isn't just the Church of England or his 6 tormented wives, it's a dark saga of absolute power, twisting a man into a walking nightmare. If this plunge into Henry's horrors left you reeling, brace yourself. History hides more twisted truths, and this king's shadow still looms, daring you to uncover what's next.